I'm Brandon Velthane. The day I graduated with my computer science degree, my parents didn't clap. They didn't cheer. Instead, my father leaned over and whispered, "You'll be living in poverty with that useless piece of paper. Should have become an accountant like your mother wanted." My mother nodded, adding, "We've wasted enough money on your fantasy. Time to face reality." But what they didn't know was that 12 hours later, my AI-powered logistics startup would go public at a $134 million valuation. The same parents who predicted my poverty were about to wake up to front-page headlines featuring their failure of a son as the newest tech millionaire in the state. So tell me, what would you do if your own parents wrote you off as a lost cause just hours before the world discovered you were anything but? Because what happened next changed everything, and they never saw it coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I have saved something extra special for you. The burgundy cap felt heavier than it should have as I adjusted it for the third time, standing in the staging area behind Thornfield University's main auditorium. Around me, hundreds of graduates buzzed with nervous energy, checking their phones for last-minute messages from family, adjusting their gowns and practicing their stage walk. The air hummed with excitement and anticipation. I checked my phone. No new messages. Through the heavy curtains, I could hear the crowd settling into their seats. Families had been arriving since dawn, claiming the best spots with flowers, balloons, and handmade signs. Some had driven hours to be here. Others had flown in from across the country. The parking lot outside looked like a festival, with tailgating families celebrating before the ceremony even began. My parents had arrived exactly 30 minutes ago. I knew because my mother, Janice Vayman, had texted me. "We're here. Section K, row 8. This better not take too long. Your father has a client call at 4. No, congratulations. No, we're proud of you." Just logistical information delivered with the emotional warmth of a parking ticket. I peered through a gap in the curtain and spotted them immediately. My father, Daryl Fenmark, sat rigid in his charcoal business suit, checking his watch every 30 seconds. He had the same expression he wore during tax season, mildly irritated and eager to be elsewhere. Beside him, my mother scrolled through her phone, occasionally showing him something on the screen. They looked like they were waiting for a delayed flight, not celebrating their son's graduation from one of the most prestigious computer science programs in the state. The empty seats around them told their own story. My father's 3 brothers lived within 50 miles of Thornfield, but none had come. My mother's sister, who always found time for her daughter's piano recitals and tennis matches, was conspicuously absent. Even my paternal grandmother, who used to slip me $20 bills and tell me I was special, hadn't made the trip. The contrast was stark when I looked at other families. 2 rows ahead, a woman held a poster that read, "That's my baby," with arrows pointing toward the stage. Behind my parents, a man wore a t-shirt with his daughter's graduation photo silk-screened across the front. Cameras flashed constantly as relatives documented every moment of what they clearly considered a momentous occasion. For my family, this was an obligation. A box to check, a necessary conclusion to what they had long considered an expensive mistake. "Brandon Velthane?" A volunteer with a clipboard approached me. "You're up in the 3rd group. Everything okay?" I nodded, though my throat felt tight. "Just nervous." She smiled warmly. "That's normal. This is your big day." "Your family must be so proud." I managed a weak smile in return, but didn't trust myself to speak. Pride wasn't the word I'd use to describe my parents' attitude toward my computer science degree. Resignation, maybe? Disappointment, definitely. They had made their feelings clear from the moment I changed my major from accounting in sophomore year. "Computer programming is not a career," my father had said during one of our last phone conversations. "It's something people do in their spare time. You need stability. You need a profession that will exist in 10 years. My mother had been even more direct. "We're not paying for you to play video games for 4 years. They had both grown up in Millbrook Valley, a small industrial town where success was measured in predictable terms: steady employment, reliable pension, modest home in a safe neighborhood. My father had worked his way up from bookkeeper to senior tax accountant over 25 years. My mother managed the office at a local insurance agency. They lived comfortably, if unimaginatively, in the same 3-bedroom house they had bought when they got married. To them, my fascination with artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms was incomprehensible. When I tried to explain my senior thesis project, a logistics optimization system that could reduce delivery costs by 30%, their eyes glazed over. When I mentioned the internship I had completed at Meridian Tech Solutions, working on predictive analytics for supply chain management, my father just shook his head. "None of that sounds like real work," he had said. "Real work is something people understand, something that solves actual problems." The irony was crushing. While they saw my education as frivolous, I had spent the last 2 years building something that solved very real problems for very real companies. But explaining the intricacies of neural networks and optimization algorithms to people who considered email a technological challenge felt impossible. As the ceremony began and the processional music started, I took my place in line with my fellow graduates. The student ahead of me, Maeva Linthorne, turned and grinned. "Can you believe we made it?" she whispered. 4 years of all-nighters and debugging sessions, and we're finally here." I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere. In just a few minutes, I would walk across that stage, shake the dean's hand, and receive my diploma. It should have been one of the proudest moments of my life. Instead, it felt hollow. As we filed into the auditorium, I caught another glimpse of my parents. My father was now openly checking emails on his phone. My mother had struck up a conversation with the woman next to her, but I could see her glancing at her watch. They looked like people enduring a lengthy church service, rather than celebrating a milestone. The processional seemed to take forever. Row by row, we filled the folding chairs set up on the auditorium floor while families cheered from the bleachers. When Maeva's name was called, her entire extended family erupted in applause. Her father stood up and whistled loudly while her mother wiped away tears. My turn was coming soon. As I watched the students ahead of me cross the stage to thunderous applause from their families, I wondered what my parents' reaction would be. Polite clapping, probably. Maybe my mother would look up from her phone long enough to snap a single photo. The truth was, I had already accepted their indifference. After years of having my interests dismissed and my ambitions questioned, I had learned not to expect enthusiasm. But sitting there in my graduation gown, surrounded by families celebrating their loved ones' achievements, the loneliness felt particularly acute. What they didn't know, what nobody in that auditorium knew, was that in approximately 14 hours, everything would change. The morning newspapers would carry headlines that would transform their disappointing son into something they never expected. But for now, as my name approached on the alphabetical list, I was still just Brandon, the family underachiever who had chosen an impractical major and refused to listen to common sense. I straightened my shoulders and prepared to walk across that stage alone, carrying the weight of their low expectations and my own quiet determination toward a future they couldn't imagine. My journey into computer science hadn't started with grand ambitions or childhood dreams of changing the world. It began with frustration. During my freshman year at Thornfield, I was dutifully following the path my parents had laid out for me. Accounting major, business minor, steady track toward becoming a CPA like my father. I sat through Introduction to Financial Accounting, Principles of Economics and Business Law, feeling my soul slowly drain away with each lecture about depreciation schedules and tax codes. The breaking point came during a mandatory computer literacy course that all business majors had to take. Professor Alvin Crestvale, a former Silicon Valley software engineer who had traded startup equity for tenure, was teaching us basic spreadsheet functions when he mentioned something that changed everything. "These Excel formulas you're learning," he said, pulling up a complex financial model on the projector, "they're just simple programming. If you can master this, you can master actual code. And if you can master code, you can automate almost anything." He demonstrated by writing a small program that could perform in seconds what we had been doing manually for hours. Purchase orders, inventory tracking, financial projections, all of it flowing through elegant lines of code with mathematical precision. After class, I approached him with questions. How did it work? What else could you do with programming? Was it difficult to learn? Professor Crestvale smiled. "Why don't you find out? There's an introductory programming course offered this semester. Professor Rowena Dryleth teaches it. She's brilliant." That weekend, I spent hours researching programming languages, watching online tutorials, and reading about companies that were revolutionizing industries through technology. Amazon's logistics algorithms, Google's search optimization, Tesla's autonomous vehicle systems. All of it built on the same foundation of mathematical thinking and systematic problem-solving that had always appealed to me. When I told my parents I was considering a computer science minor, the reaction was swift and negative. "Brandon, be practical," my mother said during our weekly phone call. "Computers are tools, not careers. You use them to do real work, like accounting." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My father was more blunt. "I've seen what happens to people who chase these technology fads. When the bubble bursts, they're left with worthless skills and no backup plan." But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had found something important. Programming felt like solving puzzles, and I had always loved puzzles. More than that, it felt like building something real and useful from nothing but logic and creativity. Against my parents' wishes, I enrolled in Introduction to Programming, then Data Structures and Algorithms, then Artificial Intelligence Fundamentals. Each course revealed new possibilities, new ways of thinking about problems and solutions. By the end of my sophomore year, I knew I had to change majors entirely. The conversation with my parents was one of the worst fights we had ever had. "You're throwing away a guaranteed career for computer games," my mother said, her voice rising with each word. "Do you have any idea how much money we've already spent on your education?" My father took a different approach, cold disappointment. "I thought we raised you to be more sensible than this. Apparently we were wrong." They threatened to stop paying tuition. I worked out a financial aid package and took on student loans to cover the difference. They said I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I said I was finally doing something that mattered to me. The rift that opened during that conversation never fully healed. Every subsequent phone call included subtle, and not so subtle, reminders that I was on the wrong path. Every semester's grades prompted questions about whether it was too late to transfer back to business school. Every holiday visit included stories about family friends, young people who were doing real jobs and buying houses and starting families. "Your cousin Elwayne just got promoted to senior manager at the bank," my mother would say. "He's only 26 and he already has a corner office." "The Morris's son just finished his MBA," my father would add. "He's making $80,000 a year right out of school." The subtext was always the same. Look at what you could have had if you had made better choices. What they didn't understand was that I wasn't just taking classes, I was building something. During my junior year, I started working on what would eventually become my senior thesis project, an AI-powered logistics optimization system that could analyze delivery routes, inventory levels, and demand patterns to reduce costs and improve efficiency. The inspiration came from a part-time job I had taken at Hawthorne Regional Distribution Center, a massive warehouse complex on the outskirts of Thornfield. I needed the money to help cover living expenses, and the overnight shift paid better than campus jobs. Working there opened my eyes to the staggering complexity of modern supply chains. Hundreds of trucks arrived and departed every day, carrying everything from electronics to groceries to automotive parts. Coordinating all of that movement required armies of dispatchers, inventory managers, and logistics coordinators, most of whom were using outdated systems and making decisions based on incomplete information. I watched drivers sit idle for hours because of scheduling conflicts. I saw entire sections of the warehouse overflow with products that weren't selling, while other areas ran out of high-demand items. I witnessed the daily frustration of managers trying to optimize routes manually, using maps and calculators and educated guesses. The inefficiencies were everywhere, and they were costing companies millions of dollars. That's when I realized that artificial intelligence wasn't just an academic subject. It was a tool that could solve real-world problems that affected real people's lives and livelihoods. I started building my system during my free time, working on it in the computer lab until 3 in the morning, testing algorithms and refining models. Professor Drelith became my unofficial mentor, helping me navigate the technical challenges and connecting me with industry contacts who could provide real-world data sets. By my senior year, I had a working prototype that could analyze a company's logistics network and recommend optimizations that typically reduced costs by 20 to 30%. More importantly, I had demonstrated the system's effectiveness using real data from 3 different companies, including Hawthorne Regional. But when I tried to explain the project to my parents, their eyes glazed over. "It sounds very complicated," my mother said politely. But what kind of job will you get with it? There are tons of opportunities in artificial intelligence and logistics optimization, I replied. Companies are desperate for people who can build these kinds of systems. My father shook his head. Desperate for people with experience, maybe, not for someone fresh out of college with no track record. They saw only risk where I saw opportunity. They focused on the uncertainty of a new field while I was energized by its possibilities. The fundamental disconnect between their worldview and mine had become unbridgeable. As graduation approached, I found myself living in two different realities. In one reality, I was a promising young technologist with valuable skills and innovative ideas, someone who professors praised and industry professionals wanted to recruit. In the other reality, I was the family disappointment who had wasted 4 years and $40,000 on an impractical degree that would lead nowhere. The weight of their skepticism was heavier than I wanted to admit. Late at night when I was alone in my apartment debugging code or refining algorithms, doubts would creep in. What if they were right? What if I had made a terrible mistake? What if all of this work amounted to nothing? But then I would look at the results my system was producing, the problems it was solving, the efficiency gains it was generating, and I knew I was onto something significant. The question was whether anyone else would see it the same way. The moment my name was called, Brandon Velthane, the scattered applause from the audience felt like drops of rain on concrete, present but insufficient. I rose from my chair, straightened my gown, and began the walk across the stage that I had imagined countless times over the past 4 years. Each step felt heavy. The stage lights were brighter than I had expected, creating a spotlight effect that made the audience beyond the first few rows fade into darkness. I could see my parents clearly, though. My father gave 2 measured claps before returning his hands to his lap. My mother lifted her phone to take a picture, but she was looking at the screen instead of me, adjusting the angle to get better lighting. Dean Patricia Kelvane smiled warmly as she handed me the diploma. "Congratulations, Brandon. Summa cum laude in computer science, outstanding achievement." "Thank you," I managed, though my voice came out smaller than intended. The handshake lasted exactly 3 seconds, professional, polite, perfunctory. Behind me, I could hear the announcer already introducing the next graduate, Francesca Leiscourt. The audience erupted in enthusiastic cheers. Clearly, Francesca had brought a larger, more invested cheering section. I walked off the stage clutching my diploma, the expensive piece of paper that represented 4 years of work, learning, growth, and transformation. But instead of feeling triumphant, I felt hollow. After the ceremony concluded, families flooded the auditorium floor for the traditional photo sessions and congratulations. Everywhere I looked, graduates were surrounded by proud relatives, posed for pictures, receiving flowers and gifts. The energy was infectious, except for the small pocket of space around me and my parents. My father approached first, extending his hand for a businessman's handshake. "Well, you did it," he said, as if I had completed an unpleasant but necessary task like filing taxes or getting a root canal. My mother stepped forward for a brief, perfunctory hug. "The ceremony was longer than I expected," she said. "Traffic is going to be terrible getting home." That was it. No, "We're proud of you." No, "What an accomplishment." No acknowledgement that I had graduated summa cum laude from one of the most competitive programs in the state. "Should we get dinner to celebrate?" I asked, hoping to extend the day to create some kind of meaningful moment we could all remember. That's when I realized that artificial intelligence wasn't just an academic subject. It was a tool that could solve real-world problems that affected real people's lives and livelihoods. I started building my system during my free time, working on it in the computer lab until 3 in the morning, testing algorithms and refining models. Professor Drelith became my unofficial mentor, helping me navigate the technical challenges and connecting me with industry contacts who could provide real-world data sets. By my senior year, I had a working prototype that could analyze a company's logistics network and recommend optimizations that typically reduced costs by 20 to 30%. More importantly, I had demonstrated the system's effectiveness using real data from 3 different companies, including Hawthorne Regional. But when I tried to explain the project to my parents, their eyes glazed over. "It sounds very complicated," my mother said politely. "But what kind of job will you get with it?" "There are tons of opportunities in artificial intelligence and logistics optimization," I replied. "Companies are desperate for people who can build these kinds of systems." My father shook his head. "Desperate for people with experience, maybe, not for someone fresh out of college with no track record." They saw only risk where I saw opportunity. They focused on the uncertainty of a new field while I was energized by its possibilities. The fundamental disconnect between their worldview and mine had become unbridgeable. As graduation approached, I found myself living in two different realities. In one reality, I was a promising young technologist with valuable skills and innovative ideas, someone who professors praised and industry professionals wanted to recruit. In the other reality, I was the family disappointment who had wasted 4 years and $40,000 on an impractical degree that would lead nowhere. The weight of their skepticism was heavier than I wanted to admit. Late at night when I was alone in my apartment debugging code or refining algorithms, doubts would creep in. What if they were right? What if I had made a terrible mistake? What if all of this work amounted to nothing? But then I would look at the results my system was producing, the problems it was solving, the efficiency gains it was generating, and I knew I was onto something significant. The question was whether anyone else would see it the same way. The moment my name was called, Brandon Velthane, the scattered applause from the audience felt like drops of rain on concrete, present but insufficient. I rose from my chair, straightened my gown, and began the walk across the stage that I had imagined countless times over the past 4 years. Each step felt heavy. The stage lights were brighter than I had expected, creating a spotlight effect that made the audience beyond the first few rows fade into darkness. I could see my parents clearly, though. My father gave 2 measured claps before returning his hands to his lap. My mother lifted her phone to take a picture, but she was looking at the screen instead of me, adjusting the angle to get better lighting. Dean Patricia Kelvane smiled warmly as she handed me the diploma. "Congratulations, Brandon. Summa cum laude in computer science, outstanding achievement." "Thank you," I managed, though my voice came out smaller than intended. The handshake lasted exactly 3 seconds, professional, polite, perfunctory. Behind me, I could hear the announcer already introducing the next graduate, Francesca Leiscourt. The audience erupted in enthusiastic cheers. Clearly, Francesca had brought a larger, more invested cheering section. I walked off the stage clutching my diploma, the expensive piece of paper that represented 4 years of work, learning, growth, and transformation. But instead of feeling triumphant, I felt hollow. After the ceremony concluded, families flooded the auditorium floor for the traditional photo sessions and congratulations. Everywhere I looked, graduates were surrounded by proud relatives, posed for pictures, receiving flowers and gifts. The energy was infectious, except for the small pocket of space around me and my parents. My father approached first, extending his hand for a businessman's handshake. "Well, you did it," he said, as if I had completed an unpleasant but necessary task like filing taxes or getting a root canal. My mother stepped forward for a brief, perfunctory hug. "The ceremony was longer than I expected," she said. "Traffic is going to be terrible getting home." That was it. No, "We're proud of you." No, "What an accomplishment." No acknowledgement that I had graduated summa cum laude from one of the most competitive programs in the state. "Should we get dinner to celebrate?" I asked, hoping to extend the day to create some kind of meaningful moment we could all remember. That's when I realized that artificial intelligence wasn't just an academic subject. It was a tool that could solve real-world problems that affected real people's lives and livelihoods. I started building my system during my free time, working on it in the computer lab until 3 in the morning, testing algorithms and refining models. Professor Drelith became my unofficial mentor, helping me navigate the technical challenges and connecting me with industry contacts who could provide real-world data sets. By my senior year, I had a working prototype that could analyze a company's logistics network and recommend optimizations that typically reduced costs by 20 to 30%. More importantly, I had demonstrated the system's effectiveness using real data from 3 different companies, including Hawthorne Regional. But when I tried to explain the project to my parents, their eyes glazed over. "It sounds very complicated," my mother said politely. "But what kind of job will you get with it?" "There are tons of opportunities in artificial intelligence and logistics optimization," I replied. "Companies are desperate for people who can build these kinds of systems." My father shook his head. "Desperate for people with experience, maybe, not for someone fresh out of college with no track record." They saw only risk where I saw opportunity. They focused on the uncertainty of a new field while I was energized by its possibilities. The fundamental disconnect between their worldview and mine had become unbridgeable. As graduation approached, I found myself living in 2 different realities. In one reality, I was a promising young technologist with valuable skills and innovative ideas, someone who professors praised and industry professionals wanted to recruit. In the other reality, I was the family disappointment who had wasted 4 years and $40,000 on an impractical degree that would lead nowhere. The weight of their skepticism was heavier than I wanted to admit. Late at night when I was alone in my apartment debugging code or refining algorithms, doubts would creep in. What if they were right? What if I had made a terrible mistake? What if all of this work amounted to nothing? But then I would look at the results my system was producing, the problems it was solving, the efficiency gains it was generating, and I knew I was onto something significant. The question was whether anyone else would see it the same way. The moment my name was called, Brandon Velthane, the scattered applause from the audience felt like drops of rain on concrete, present but insufficient. I rose from my chair, straightened my gown, and began the walk across the stage that I had imagined countless times over the past 4 years. Each step felt heavy. The stage lights were brighter than I had expected, creating a spotlight effect that made the audience beyond the first few rows fade into darkness. I could see my parents clearly, though. My father gave 2 measured claps before returning his hands to his lap. My mother lifted her phone to take a picture, but she was looking at the screen instead of me, adjusting the angle to get better lighting. Dean Patricia Kelvane smiled warmly as she handed me the diploma. "Congratulations, Brandon. Summa cum laude in computer science, outstanding achievement." "Thank you," I managed, though my voice came out smaller than intended. The handshake lasted exactly 3 seconds, professional, polite, perfunctory. Behind me, I could hear the announcer already introducing the next graduate, Francesca Leiscourt. The audience erupted in enthusiastic cheers. Clearly, Francesca had brought a larger, more invested cheering section. I walked off the stage clutching my diploma, the expensive piece of paper that represented 4 years of work, learning, growth, and transformation. But instead of feeling triumphant, I felt hollow. After the ceremony concluded, families flooded the auditorium floor for the traditional photo sessions and congratulations. Everywhere I looked, graduates were surrounded by proud relatives, posed for pictures, receiving flowers and gifts. The energy was infectious, except for the small pocket of space around me and my parents. My father approached first, extending his hand for a businessman's handshake. "Well, you did it," he said, as if I had completed an unpleasant but necessary task like filing taxes or getting a root canal. My mother stepped forward for a brief, perfunctory hug. "The ceremony was longer than I expected," she said. "Traffic is going to be terrible getting home." That was it. No, "We're proud of you." No, "What an accomplishment." No acknowledgement that I had graduated summa cum laude from one of the most competitive programs in the state. "Should we get dinner to celebrate?" I asked, hoping to extend the day to create some kind of meaningful moment we could all remember. The doubt was suffocating. I had been so confident in my path, so certain that I was building something meaningful and valuable, but sitting there in my empty apartment with my parents, words echoing in my mind, that confidence felt naive and misplaced. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen, at the thousands of lines of code that represented my senior project, my logistics optimization system. Was it really just an elaborate academic exercise? Was I really just playing with expensive toys while other people did real work? The rational part of my mind knew better. I had seen the results of my system in action. I had demonstrated its effectiveness with real companies using real data. Industry professionals had praised the innovation and elegance of my approach. But the emotional impact of my parents' rejection was overwhelming that rational knowledge. Their voices were louder than my professors' encouragement, more persistent than my own achievements. I closed the laptop and sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, wondering if graduation day would be remembered as the end of my education or the beginning of my disillusionment. What I didn't know was that while I sat there questioning everything, events were already in motion that would render my parents' dire predictions not just wrong but spectacularly, publicly, undeniably wrong. While I sat in my apartment, questioning everything I had worked toward, 300 miles away in the Meridian Tech District, a conference room buzzed with activity that would change my life forever. The truth was, I hadn't been entirely honest with my parents about my opportunities in the tech sector. It wasn't because I wanted to deceive them. It was because I had learned that sharing my ambitions with people who didn't understand them only led to disappointment and discouragement. Some dreams, I had discovered, were too fragile to expose to skepticism before they were strong enough to survive it. 6 months earlier, during my final semester, I had been approached by Sandro Dramier, a venture capitalist from Ironwood Capital Partners. Professor Draliff had shown him my logistics optimization system during a university technology showcase, and he had immediately recognized its commercial potential. "This isn't just a student project," Sandro had told me over coffee at a small cafe near campus. "This is enterprise-level software that could revolutionize how companies handle supply chain management." The conversation that followed changed everything. Sandro explained that logistics inefficiencies cost American businesses over $100 billion annually. Companies were desperate for solutions that could provide even marginal improvements in efficiency. My system, which could deliver optimization gains of 20 to 30%, was exactly what the market needed. "I want to help you turn this into a real company," he had said. "Not in 5 years, not after you get some experience working for someone else. Now." The next 3 months had been a whirlwind of legal paperwork, technical development, and business planning. We incorporated as Logistream Solutions, with me as Chief Technology Officer and co-founder. Sandro brought in Isabella Vreneth, a former Amazon executive, as CEO. We secured initial funding of $2 million and began developing a commercial version of my system. Working 16-hour days while finishing my senior coursework had been exhausting, but also exhilarating. Every night, after completing assignments and studying for exams, I would switch into entrepreneur mode, refining algorithms, debugging code, and preparing demonstrations for potential clients. The breakthrough came in March, just 2 months before graduation. We secured our first major client, Pinnacle Distribution Systems, a mid-sized logistics company that handled shipping for over 200 retailers across the Southeast. Our system reduced their operational costs by 28% in the first month of implementation. Word spread quickly in the logistics industry. By April, we had 6 additional clients and a waiting list of companies wanting to implement our system. Revenue projections for our first year exceeded $8 million. That's when the big offer came. Transglobal Dynamics, one of the largest logistics conglomerates in North America, approached us about an acquisition. They had been developing their own AI optimization systems for 3 years without achieving anything close to our results. Rather than continue competing, they wanted to buy Logistream Solutions outright. The initial offer was $47 million. Isabella negotiated it up to $68 million. By the time all the terms were finalized, including performance bonuses and retention packages, the total deal value reached $96 million. But Sandro had a different idea. "We don't need their money," he told Isabella and me during a late-night strategy session. "What we need is market validation and credibility. Instead of selling to Transglobal, let's go public." The idea seemed impossible. Logistream was barely 6 months old. We had only 7 employees. Going public typically required years of established revenue growth and proven business models. But Sandro had connections, and our technology was genuinely revolutionary. More importantly, the market timing was perfect. Investors were hungry for AI companies with practical applications and demonstrable results. E-commerce growth had created massive demand for logistics optimization. Major players like Amazon and FedEx were investing billions in supply chain technology. "The IPO market is wide open for disruptive logistics technology," Sandro explained, "especially with proven revenue and major client contracts. We could raise enough capital to expand nationally within 18 months. The process moved with startling speed. Investment banking firms competed to underwrite our offering. Due diligence investigations confirmed that our technology was not only innovative but also defensible. We held 3 provisional patents with more pending. Financial projections showed a clear path to profitability and sustainable growth. By early May, just 2 weeks before my graduation, we had SEC approval for a public offering. The underwriters projected an opening valuation between $100 and $150 million, depending on market conditions and investor demand. I signed the final paperwork on May 15th, 3 days before graduation. At that point, I owned 18% of Logistream Solutions. If the IPO opened at the projected range, my stake would be worth between $18 and $27 million. But I told none of this to my parents. Part of the secrecy was practical. SEC regulations restricted what we could say publicly before the offering period ended. Part of it was emotional. I had learned from years of experience that sharing good news with my parents often resulted in criticism or skepticism that diminished my excitement. But mostly, I think I wanted to prove something. I wanted my success to speak for itself before anyone had a chance to minimize or explain it away. On graduation day, while my parents were predicting my poverty and suggesting I pursue accounting certification, the final IPO preparations were being completed. Marketing materials were being printed. Investor calls were being scheduled. Media interviews were being arranged. The morning after graduation, Logistream Solutions would begin trading on the NASDAQ under the symbol LGST. Based on pre-market indicators, the opening price was projected at $74 per share, giving the company a market capitalization of $134 million. My 18% stake would be worth $24.1 million. But even that wasn't the whole story. The real validation wasn't the money, it was the recognition from industry experts who understood what we had built. Transportation Weekly had called our system the most significant advancement in logistics optimization in the past decade. Supply Chain Management Review had featured us on their cover with the headline, "The Future of Freight." Harvard Business School had already contacted us about developing a case study. This wasn't just financial success. It was proof that everything I had believed about artificial intelligence and machine learning was correct. The technology was transformative. The applications were limitless. The market demand was real and substantial. While I sat in my apartment that evening, dwelling on my parents, harsh predictions, order confirmations were flowing into our servers. Institutional investors were placing buy orders. Financial journalists were preparing articles about the hot new AI startup that was disrupting the logistics industry. In less than 12 hours, the world would know that Brandon Velthane wasn't destined for poverty. He was destined for something much more significant. But first, I had to get through the longest night of my life, carrying the weight of my parents, disappointment, and the secret knowledge that everything was about to change. My phone started buzzing at 6:47 a.m. I had barely slept, spending most of the night alternating between excitement about the IPO launch and replaying my parents' harsh words from graduation day. When the first call came through, I was already awake, staring at the ceiling and listening to the early morning sounds of my neighbors starting their days. The caller ID showed Isabella Vreneth. As our CEO, she had been monitoring the pre-market trading since 4 a.m. Eastern Time. "Brandon!" Her voice crackled through the phone, barely containing her excitement. "Are you sitting down?" I sat up in bed. "What's happening?" "We opened at $81. $81, Brandon. That's $7 above our highest projection." I did the math instantly in my head. 18% of $134 million had just become 18% of $146 million. My stake was worth $26.3 million. "But that's not the best part," Isabella continued. "CNBC wants to interview you at 9 a.m. The Wall Street Journal is running a front-page story, and the phones have been ringing non-stop with acquisition offers." I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the quiet street. Everything appeared exactly the same as it had 12 hours earlier. Same apartment buildings, same parked cars, same modest neighborhood where graduate students lived on limited budgets. But everything was different. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "First, don't panic. Second, don't say anything to anyone until we prep you for the interviews. Third, enjoy this moment. You've earned it." After hanging up, I made coffee with shaking hands and opened my laptop. The Logistream Solutions stock ticker was displayed prominently on the NASDAQ homepage. LGST minus $81, plus $7, plus 9.5%. The chart showed steady upward movement since the opening bell. But the real surprise was the news coverage. Local Graduates AI startup debuts at $146 million valuation, Thornfield Business Journal. From dorm room to Wall Street, the Logistream success story, TechCrunch. Former warehouse worker builds revolutionary logistics platform, Forbes. Each article told essentially the same story. Brilliant young technologist develops groundbreaking artificial intelligence system, drops out of traditional career path to launch startup, achieves massive success. The Forbes piece included a photo of me from the University Technology Showcase, standing next to a monitor displaying our optimization algorithms. My phone rang again. This time it was Professor Drelith. Brandon, I just saw the news. This is incredible. Do you realize what you've accomplished? I'm still processing it, I admitted. The phone has been ringing all morning. Alumni Relations wants to feature you in the university magazine. The dean wants to invite you to speak at next year's graduation. 3 different venture capital firms have called asking about other students working on AI projects. The scope of the attention was overwhelming. This wasn't just business news. It was becoming a human interest story about overcoming expectations and achieving unlikely success. At 8:30 a.m., I drove to the CNBC affiliate studio in downtown Thornfield for my first television interview. The makeup artist who prepared me for camera kept shaking her head in amazement. 24 years old and worth $26 million, she said while applying powder to reduce the glare from the studio lights. What does that feel like? I didn't have a good answer. It felt surreal. It felt validating. It felt like proof that everything I had believed about my potential was correct. The interview itself passed in a blur. The anchor asked about my background, my technology, my plans for the future. I tried to sound confident and knowledgeable, while internally marveling at the fact that I was on national television discussing my company. What advice would you give to other young people who want to follow a similar path? She asked near the end of the segment. Don't let other people's limitations become your own, I said. Sometimes the people closest to you are the least equipped to see your potential. It was a subtle reference to my parents' skepticism, but I didn't elaborate. This wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving myself right. After the interview, I drove back to my apartment to find my phone completely overwhelmed with notifications, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, text messages from college friends who had seen the news, LinkedIn connection requests from industry professionals. But the most surprising messages came from family. My mother had called 4 times, starting at 9:15 a.m. My father had sent 2 text messages. Even my estranged uncle Jonas Thalvin, who I hadn't heard from in 3 years, had reached out via Facebook. I listened to my mother's voicemails in chronological order. 9:15 a.m. Brandon, I just saw something on the news about a company with your name. Call me back as soon as you get this. 9:47 a.m. Brandon, your father is showing me articles on his computer. Is this real? Are you really involved with this IPO thing? 10:23 a.m. Brandon, we need to talk. This is incredible. Why didn't you tell us about any of this? 11:05 a.m. Brandon, please call us back. We're so proud of you. We had no idea. Please call. The shift in tone from the previous day was jarring. 24 hours earlier, they had been predicting my poverty and suggesting I pursue accounting certification. Now they were proud and amazed and eager to reconnect. My father's text messages were more direct. Saw the news. Very impressive. We should talk about investment strategies. Forbes article mentions $26 million stake. Is that accurate? Need to discuss tax implications. Even in his congratulations, he was defaulting to practical concerns and unsolicited advice. By noon, the Thornfield Business Journal had posted a follow-up article with more details about my background. They had interviewed Professor Drelith, who praised my innovative thinking and work ethic. They had spoken with my former supervisor at Hawthorne Regional Distribution Center, who remembered me as the quiet kid who was always asking questions about how things worked. Most significantly, they had tried to interview my parents. Brandon has always been very determined. My mother was quoted as saying, "We're extremely proud of his achievements. We always knew he would do something special." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The same woman who had dismissed my computer science degree as expensive fantasy was now claiming prescient knowledge of my potential. But reading that quote, I didn't feel angry. I felt something closer to pity. They were so invested in their narrative of practical success and conventional wisdom that they couldn't acknowledge how wrong they had been. Instead, they were rewriting history to make themselves look supportive and insightful. The afternoon brought more interview requests, more congratulatory messages, and more evidence that Logistream Solutions was becoming a genuine business phenomenon. By market close, our stock had reached $87 per share, making my stake worth $28.9 million. But the most meaningful moment came at 6 p.m., when I received a handwritten note delivered to my apartment. "Mr. Velthane," it read, "I'm Lunar Feldran, the barista from Copper Creek Coffee, where you used to study late at night. I saw you on the news today and wanted to say congratulations. You were always polite and hardworking. and it makes me happy to see good things happen to good people. P.S. Your usual order is on the house whenever you want it." That note, from someone who had witnessed my struggles without judgment, meant more than all the newspaper articles and television interviews combined. As evening approached, I realized I was facing a choice. I could return my parents' calls and pretend that their sudden enthusiasm was genuine. I could accept their revised version of events and move forward, as if their harsh predictions had never happened. Or I could acknowledge that some relationships are revealed rather than changed by success, and that true support isn't retroactive. Either way, I was no longer the person they thought they knew. The question was whether they were capable of accepting who I had actually become. I didn't return their calls immediately. For 3 days, I let my parents' messages accumulate while I focused on the demands of running a newly public company. Media interviews, investor calls, client meetings, and strategic planning sessions filled my schedule from dawn until well past midnight. Every morning brought new opportunities, new challenges, and new validation that LogiStream Solutions was becoming exactly what we had envisioned. But the family situation required careful consideration, not reactive emotions. On Thursday evening, I sat in my apartment with a legal pad and did something that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. I planned how to manage my relationship with my parents from a position of strength rather than weakness. The shift in power dynamics was undeniable. They needed something from me now. Access to my success, association with my achievement, perhaps even financial benefit from my newfound wealth. I no longer needed their approval or support. The validation I had spent years seeking from them had come from the market, from industry experts, from objective measures of value and innovation. This reversal created an opportunity, but also a responsibility. How I handled their sudden change of heart would say something important about who I was becoming as a person, not just as an entrepreneur. I decided to establish terms. Friday morning, I called my mother back. "Brandon," she answered before the first ring finished. "Oh, thank goodness. We've been so worried about you. This whole IPO thing must be so stressful." The concern in her voice sounded genuine, but I recognized the underlying assumption that success was something that happened to me rather than something I had created through years of deliberate effort. "I'm fine, Mom. Actually, I'm doing better than fine. We saw the interviews on television. You looked so confident, so professional. We're just so proud of you." I paused, letting the silence stretch long enough to become uncomfortable. "Are you proud of me, or are you proud of the outcome?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, were you proud of me on Sunday when you said I'd live in poverty? Were you proud of me during my sophomore year when you threatened to stop paying tuition? Were you proud of me last Christmas when you spent dinner talking about all the family friends, young people who had real jobs?" The silence that followed was different from the previous pause. This one carried weight. "Brandon, we were just worried about your future. We wanted what was best for you." "No," I said calmly, "you wanted what felt safe to you. There's a difference." Another pause. "Can we see you?" she asked finally. "Your father and I would like to take you to dinner, to celebrate properly." "I'd be happy to have dinner with you," I replied. "But first, I need you to understand something. The person you're celebrating today is the same person you dismissed on Sunday. The degree you called worthless enabled everything that's happened this week. The computer games you mocked became the foundation of a $146 million company. We know that now. Do you? Because I need to be sure we're having an honest conversation about what happened, not a revised version that makes everyone feel better." I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line. "What do you want from us, Brandon?" It was a fair question, and I had been thinking about the answer for 3 days. "I want acknowledgement, not just of my success, but of how wrong you were about my choices. I want you to understand that your skepticism wasn't protective wisdom, it was limiting fear. And I want assurance that you won't repeat the same pattern if I share future plans with you. Of course, we understand now. I'm not finished. I also want you to understand that our relationship going forward will be based on who I actually am, not who you thought I should become. I'm not going to pretend that Sunday didn't happen just because Thursday feels different." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes. My mother apologized repeatedly, but her apologies focused on being wrong about the outcome rather than being wrong about me. She was sorry that computer science had turned out to be lucrative, not sorry that she had dismissed my passion and potential. It was a start, but it wasn't enough. That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called the Thornfield Business Journal and requested a follow-up interview, not about Logistream solutions, but about education, entrepreneurship, and the importance of supporting unconventional paths to success. I want to talk about the students who are being discouraged from pursuing technology careers because their families don't understand the field, I told the reporter, Morel Corvain. There are probably dozens of potential innovators right here at Thornfield who are being pushed toward safer majors by well-meaning parents who don't recognize the opportunities in emerging industries. The article that resulted was published the following Monday under the headline, Tech Success Story Advocates for Student Innovation. In it, I spoke candidly about the challenges of pursuing artificial intelligence research without family support, the importance of mentorship from professors who understood cutting-edge technology, and the need for parents to trust their young people's instincts about their own capabilities. The biggest obstacle to innovation isn't technical complexity, I was quoted as saying. It's cultural resistance to unfamiliar ideas. When we dismiss fields we don't understand, we risk dismissing the people who could transform them. The article generated significant attention within the university community. Professor Drele forwarded me emails from parents asking how to better support young people interested in technology careers. The computer science department received a surge of inquiries from prospective students whose families had previously steered them toward more traditional majors. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. Dr. Tavira Morwen, the Dean of Students, called to invite me to participate in a new program she was developing, a mentorship initiative that would connect successful alumni with current students facing family pressure to abandon their chosen fields of study. Your story resonates with a lot of our students, she explained. Not just in computer science, but in art, music, creative writing, social work, any field where career prospects aren't immediately obvious to parents who prioritize financial security above personal fulfillment. I agreed immediately. The opportunity to prevent other students from experiencing the isolation and self-doubt I had endured felt like a natural extension of my success. Within 2 weeks, I had established the Pathway Innovation Fund, a scholarship program that provided financial support specifically for students whose families had withdrawn funding due to disagreements over career choices. The first recipients were a junior studying sustainable energy engineering whose parents wanted her to become a doctor, and a senior developing educational software whose father insisted he switch to business administration. The scholarship announcement generated another wave of media attention, but this time the focus was on giving back rather than personal achievement. Local television stations covered the story. The university featured it prominently in their alumni newsletter. Most importantly, families throughout the region began having different conversations about career expectations and student autonomy. My parents' reaction to this philanthropic initiative was telling. It's wonderful that you're able to help other students, my mother said during our delayed celebration dinner at Whitmore's, an upscale restaurant in downtown Thornfield. Though I hope you're not being too generous, you should think about your own future first. My father nodded agreement. Charity is admirable, but you need to be strategic about it. Tax implications, estate planning, that sort of thing. Even in their attempts to be supportive, they defaulted to cautionary advice and practical concerns. They couldn't simply celebrate my choices without trying to manage them. The scholarship fund is strategic, I replied. It's an investment in the next generation of innovators. Some of those students might become partners, employees, or competitors. Supporting their development now benefits the entire technology ecosystem. If you say so, my father replied, though his tone suggested skepticism. The dinner continued with stilted conversation about my newfound wealth, media attention, and business prospects. They asked questions about stock options, investment strategies, and expansion plans, all topics that position them as advisors rather than simply parents celebrating their son's achievement. As we waited for dessert, my mother leaned forward conspiratorially. Brandon, your father and I have been talking. With everything that's happened, with all this success, maybe we should spend more time together. Maybe we could plan a family vacation, or you could help us look at investment properties. We want to be more involved in your life. I set down my coffee cup and looked at both of them. I appreciate that you want to be more involved. But involvement requires understanding, not just participation. If you want to be part of my life going forward, You need to accept that I make decisions based on principles you might not immediately understand. You need to trust my judgment instead of defaulting to skepticism." "Of course," my mother said quickly. "That means no unsolicited advice about spending money or choosing projects. No comments about risk management or practical considerations unless I specifically ask for your input. And no attempts to steer me toward choices that make you feel more comfortable." My father's expression tightened. "We're your parents, Brandon. We have a right to express our concerns. You have a right to express them. I have a right to ignore them. The difference is that now I'm confident enough to do exactly that." The conversation that followed established new boundaries that felt both necessary and overdue. They could be proud of my success, but they couldn't claim credit for wisdom they had never demonstrated. They could offer support, but they couldn't expect influence over decisions they weren't qualified to make. By the end of the evening, we had reached an understanding that felt more honest than any conversation we had shared in years. They were still my parents, but I was no longer their project to manage or their disappointment to endure. I was someone they needed to learn to know. 3 weeks after the IPO, I drove to Millbrook Valley for the first time since graduation. The decision hadn't been impulsive. Every interaction with my parents since the news broke had been carefully managed. Phone calls with predetermined agendas, dinner meetings in neutral locations, conversations bounded by time constraints in public settings. We had been performing politeness rather than addressing substance. But there were things that needed to be said face to face, in the house where I had grown up believing their version of my limitations. Some conversations require the weight of history and the honesty that only comes from standing in the place where the original wounds were inflicted. I parked in the driveway of their modest 2-story colonial, the same house where I had spent countless evenings at the kitchen table, trying to explain my passion for programming while they redirected the conversation toward more practical concerns. The paint was still the same pale yellow my mother had chosen 15 years earlier. The front garden still featured the same conservative arrangement of marigolds and impatiens that required minimal maintenance and offended no neighbors. Everything looked exactly as I remembered, but approaching the front door felt like visiting a museum of my former limitations. My mother answered before I could knock, as if she had been watching through the window. "Brandon, what a wonderful surprise. We weren't expecting you until next week." I hadn't told them I was coming. The spontaneity was intentional. "I was in the area for a client meeting," I said, which was partially true. Logistream had signed a new contract with a manufacturing company located 40 minutes away. "I thought we should talk." My father appeared from the living room, folding his newspaper with the precise movements of someone who had been reading the same financial section ritual for decades. "Brandon, good to see you." He extended his hand for the same businessman's handshake he had offered at graduation. "How's business?" "Business is excellent, but that's not why I'm here." I walked past them into the living room without waiting for an invitation. The space felt smaller than my childhood memories suggested, but every detail remained exactly the same. The beige sofa with carefully placed throw pillows, the entertainment center with its collection of practical electronics, the family photos arranged on the mantel, notably none featuring my graduation day. "Can I get you something to drink?" my mother offered, defaulting to hostess mode. "Coffee? Iced tea?" "I'm fine. I'd like you both to sit down." They exchanged glances but complied, settling onto the sofa with the careful positioning of people who sensed an uncomfortable conversation approaching. I remained standing, a position that immediately shifted the power dynamics in the room. For years, these conversations had taken place with me in the subordinate position. The student, the supplicant, the family disappointment seeking approval. Today I was the successful entrepreneur, the media personality, the person whose phone rang constantly with opportunities they couldn't comprehend. "I want to talk about graduation day," I began. "Brandon, we've already discussed this," my father said. "We've apologized for not understanding your field better. We've acknowledged that we were wrong about the career prospects." "You apologize for being wrong about the outcome. That's not the same thing." My mother leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "I mean you were wrong about me, not just about computer science. You saw your own limitations and assumed they were mine. You took your fear of unfamiliar territory and projected it onto my choices. You confused your inability to understand artificial intelligence with my inability to succeed in it." The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner, the same clock that had marked the passage of time during countless uncomfortable family discussions. "That's not fair," my father said finally. "We were trying to protect you from making a mistake." "No, you were trying to protect yourselves from the anxiety of watching me pursue something you couldn't control or predict. There's a difference between protective concern and projective fear." I walked to the mantel and picked up a framed photo of my high school graduation. In it, I was smiling broadly, surrounded by both parents who looked genuinely proud. 8 years later, at my college graduation, they had sat in the audience like disappointed creditors waiting for a defaulted loan to be acknowledged. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" I asked, setting the photo down and facing them directly. "We said we were concerned about your future," my mother replied. "You said I would live in poverty with a useless piece of paper. You said you had wasted enough money on my fantasy. You said it was time to face reality." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We were frustrated. We had invested a lot in your education, and we couldn't see how it would pay off. You couldn't see how it would pay off, so you assumed it wouldn't. You couldn't understand the value of artificial intelligence research, so you concluded it was worthless. You couldn't envision a career path in technology, so you decided none existed." I returned to my standing position in front of them. "But here's what I need you to understand. Your inability to see my potential didn't mean the potential wasn't there. Your failure to comprehend emerging technology didn't make my expertise in it any less valuable. Your comfort with conventional career paths didn't make my unconventional path any less valid." The silence stretched longer this time. My mother's eyes were beginning to water, but I wasn't finished. "For 4 years I doubted myself because you doubted me. I questioned my instincts because you questioned my choices. I worked twice as hard as necessary because I was trying to prove something to people who had already decided I was wrong." "We never wanted you to doubt yourself," my mother said softly. "But you did want me to abandon my path and follow yours. When I refused, you withdrew support instead of trusting that maybe, just maybe, I understood my own capabilities better than you did." My father's expression had shifted from defensive to something approaching comprehension. Not acceptance, but recognition that this conversation was different from our previous discussions. "What do you want from us now?" he asked. It was the same question my mother had posed during our phone call, but this time I gave a different answer. "I want you to own what you did, instead of revising it into something more palatable. I want you to acknowledge that you were wrong about me as a person, not just wrong about my field of study. And I want you to understand that your sudden pride in my success doesn't erase the damage caused by your years of skepticism." I walked to the kitchen table where I had eaten thousands of meals, completed countless homework assignments, and endured numerous lectures about the importance of practical thinking and realistic expectations. "This table," I said, running my hand along its worn surface, "is where you told me I wasn't smart enough for advanced mathematics. It's where you suggested I consider community college instead of Thornfield University. It's where you explained that people like us don't take risks because we can't afford to fail." Both parents had followed me into the kitchen, drawn by the gravity of the moment. "People like us," I repeated. "But I'm not like you. I never was. My risk tolerance is higher. My vision extends further. My definition of security includes the possibility of extraordinary success, not just protection against extraordinary failure." My mother reached out tentatively and touched my arm. "We were trying to spare you disappointment. You were trying to spare yourselves disappointment. There's a difference." I moved to the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard where I had spent countless hours as a teenager, dreaming about possibilities that extended far beyond the geographical and intellectual boundaries of Millbrook Valley. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, turning back to face them. "Anger requires energy that I'd rather invest in building something meaningful. But I am clear about what happened here, and I need you to be clear about it too." "What are you saying?" my father asked. "I'm saying that our relationship going forward depends on your ability to accept who I actually am instead of trying to reshape me into who you think I should be. I'm saying that your skepticism taught me to trust my own judgment more than your approval. And I'm saying that while I'm grateful for the lessons you didn't intend to teach, I won't pretend they weren't painful to learn." The conversation that followed lasted another 2 hours. We talked about expectations and disappointments, about the difference between caution and fear, about the responsibility parents have to expand their perspectives when their perspectives limit their offspring's potential. My mother cried, not from sadness but from recognition. My father argued, not from defensiveness, but from a genuine attempt to understand how his protective instincts had become restrictive barriers. By the time I left, nothing had been resolved in the sense of achieving perfect understanding or complete reconciliation, but everything had been clarified in the sense of establishing honest ground rules for whatever relationship we might build going forward. As I drove away from the house where I had learned to doubt my own instincts, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete freedom from the need for their validation. They could choose to grow into parents who celebrated unconventional success instead of fearing unconventional risks. Or they could remain people who mistook their limitations for universal truths. Either way, I was no longer waiting for their permission to become who I already was. 9 months after the IPO, I stood in the auditorium of Thornfield University's new Innovation Center, looking out at an audience that would have seemed impossible during my undergraduate years. The front rows were filled with current computer science students, their laptops open, taking notes as I walked them through the technical architecture of Logistream's optimization algorithms. Behind them sat faculty members, including Professor Drelith, who had been instrumental in helping me believe that unconventional thinking could lead to conventional success. But the back of the auditorium held the audience that mattered most to me. 43 scholarship recipients from the Pathway Innovation Fund, young people who had chosen passion over pragmatism despite family pressure to pursue safer alternatives. The most important lesson I learned, I said, advancing to my final slide, wasn't about artificial intelligence or machine learning or even entrepreneurship. It was about the difference between validation and vindication. I clicked to a photograph of my graduation day, the same image that had appeared in numerous articles about my success story. Validation comes from external sources, other people's approval, market recognition, financial rewards. Vindication comes from proving that skeptics were wrong. For a long time, I thought I was seeking validation. Actually, I was seeking vindication. A student in the third row raised her hand. "What's wrong with proving skeptics wrong?" "Nothing's wrong with it," I replied, "but it's not sustainable as a primary motivation. If your success depends on changing other people's opinions about your worth, you're still giving them power over your self-concept. You're still seeking their permission to be who you are." I had learned this distinction through months of therapy with Dr. Solara Grenthal, a psychologist who specialized in working with entrepreneurs and high achievers. The success of Logistream had brought financial freedom and professional recognition, but it had also triggered unexpected emotional challenges. "You're grieving," she had explained during one of our early sessions. "Success can force you to confront the childhood you actually had versus the childhood you deserved. Achieving your goals doesn't automatically heal the wounds caused by people who should have supported those goals from the beginning." The therapy had been as transformative as the IPO, helping me understand that my parents' belated pride was less meaningful than my own evolved self-confidence. Their approval had become irrelevant, not because I was angry with them, but because I no longer needed it to feel complete. This shift had changed everything about how I approached relationships, both personal and professional. 3 months after the confrontation at my childhood home, my mother had called with what she clearly considered exciting news. "Brandon, I've been telling everyone at work about your success. My boss wants to invest in your company, and the neighbors keep asking if you might speak at their son's career day presentation." I had listened patiently before responding. "Mom, I appreciate that you're proud of me now, but I need you to understand something. I don't want to be your trophy or your conversation starter. If you want to have a relationship with me, it needs to be because you genuinely want to know who I am, not because you want to be associated with what I've accomplished." The conversation that followed had been difficult but necessary. We established new boundaries based on mutual respect, rather than parental authority or filial obligation. She could celebrate my success, but she couldn't claim credit for wisdom she had never demonstrated. She could offer emotional support, but she couldn't expect me to prioritize her comfort over my own judgment. My father had taken longer to adjust to these new dynamics. His attempts to offer business advice and investment strategies had been gently but firmly redirected. When he suggested that I consider hiring him as a financial consultant for Logistream, I had to explain that our family relationship and my professional decisions needed to remain separate. "You raised me to be independent," I had told him. "This is what independence looks like." But the most meaningful transformation had been the relationships I had built, rather than the ones I had restructured. Isabella Vreneth, my CEO and co-founder, had become not just a business partner, but a genuine friend. Our working relationship had evolved into mutual mentorship, with her teaching me about leadership and strategic thinking while I shared insights about technical innovation and product development. Sandro Drymir, our original investor, had introduced me to a network of entrepreneurs, technologists, and innovators who understood the unique challenges of building something new in an industry that changed constantly. These relationships were based on shared values and complementary skills rather than family obligation or social expectation. But perhaps the most rewarding connections had come through the scholarship program. Marcus Tharvin, a junior studying renewable energy engineering, had been cut off financially by his parents when he refused to switch to pre-med. The scholarship had allowed him to continue his research into solar panel efficiency optimization. 6 months later, he had developed a new coating technology that increased energy conversion rates by 12%. Kailis Norwick, a senior in game design, had faced similar family pressure to pursue business administration. With scholarship support, she had completed her thesis project, an educational simulation that taught complex mathematical concepts through immersive gameplay. 2 major educational software companies were now competing to license her innovation. Their success stories reminded me that talent and determination could overcome skepticism and financial obstacles, but only if someone was willing to provide the support that families sometimes withdrew. Standing in that auditorium, I realized that my true legacy wouldn't be Logostream Solutions or the IPO or even the scholarships I had funded. It would be the permission I had given other people to trust their own instincts despite external doubt. The question isn't whether your family understands your choices, I told the students. The question is whether you understand them well enough to pursue them with or without external support. After the presentation, I stayed for an hour answering individual questions and meeting with scholarship recipients. Their enthusiasm and determination reminded me of my own undergraduate years, when I had been equally passionate about artificial intelligence despite my parents' skepticism. But there was a crucial difference. These students had someone in their corner from the beginning. They didn't have to spend years doubting themselves or seeking validation from people who were incapable of providing it. As I walked across campus toward my car, I passed the computer lab where I had spent countless late nights working on my senior thesis. Through the windows, I could see current students hunched over their keyboards, debugging code and testing algorithms with the same focused intensity I remembered from my own experience. Some of them were probably facing family pressure to abandon their studies for more practical alternatives. Some were probably questioning whether their passion for technology would translate into sustainable careers. Some were probably wondering whether their unconventional interests would ever be understood by the people whose approval they craved. I made a mental note to expand the scholarship program next year. That evening, as I reviewed financial reports in my new office overlooking the Meridian Tech District, I reflected on the strange trajectory that had brought me from my parents' skepticism to my current position of influence and stability. The irony wasn't lost on me that their attempts to limit my potential had actually strengthened my determination to exceed it. Their inability to envision my success had forced me to develop the independent confidence necessary to achieve it. Their withdrawal of support had taught me to build my own foundation. In a peculiar way, I was grateful for their skepticism, not because it had been wise or helpful, but because overcoming it had revealed capabilities I might never have discovered if the path had been easier. My phone buzzed with a text message from Professor Drylith. "Outstanding presentation today. The students were inspired. You've become exactly who I always knew you could be." I smiled and typed back, "Thank you for seeing it before I could see it myself." But as I sent the message, I realized something important had changed. I no longer needed anyone else to see my potential in order to believe in it myself. The external validation was nice, but it was no longer necessary. I had finally learned the difference between success that depends on other people's recognition and success that stands on its own foundation. The former makes you vulnerable to other people's limitations. The latter makes you free to exceed them. And freedom, I had discovered, was worth more than any IPO. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.